Hello, boils and ghouls. Today we're looking at another classic Tales from the Crypt episode called Abra Cadaver. Abra Cadaver is about two brothers, Martin and Carl, two up-and-coming medical professionals. However, after a harmless prank goes awry, leaving Martin partially paralyzed, he sets out to get revenge on his brother for ruining his once promising career as a surgeon. The episode begins as Martin and Carl bicker over Carl's lack of care for his medical schooling. Martin is something of a genius, so all of this comes very easily to him. But Carl? He's more like the average frat guy that just wants to screw around.
I'm weak on circ. We'll come back to it. Let's look at something else.
Yeah, who needs to know how the circulatory system works? Carl seems to be more interested in the fresher bodies anyways. Martin has a theory that the brain lives on after death significantly longer than previously thought. Carl tries testing this theory by talking to and getting very handsy with this corpse.
It's like her skin responded. Huh?
The corpse's skin seems to respond to Carl's touch, which sort of freaks him out for a second, but the real freaky part is how this boom mic keeps popping into the shot. Since Martin now sees that the corpse is reacting to touch, he thinks he should go in for a little feel as well. You know, for science. I guess the corpse only likes guys with sweet mullets touching her. But wouldn't you know it, the whole thing was nothing more than a little joke at Martin's expense. It's Martin's birthday and Carl planned a little surprise party for him, and he looks pretty damn surprised. Also, the nude corpse, that's Carl's girlfriend. Interesting way of introducing your girlfriend to the family.
Buddy, what's wrong? What's wrong?
The joke was a little too successful because Carl may have just killed his brother. Some time passes and now we're in the present. Well, the early 90s present. And you can tell it's the present because everything is in color now, and Carl no longer has his sweet mullet. Carl did seem to become a successful doctor, but his brother on the other hand...
Good morning, Carl.
I called in every favor I had to get you that teaching position, Martin. Why aren't you taking it?
Martin luckily didn't die from the little prank, but he's now partially paralyzed on one side of his body and relegated to the basement where he works on experimental medical treatments. He's basically the Phantom of the Opera, but for doctors. Carl tried getting his brother a teaching gig, but that's not exactly what Martin wants to do. There's obvious tension between the two brothers, and Martin still holds a grudge against Carl for ruining what could have been a promising career in surgery. Carl is slightly annoyed because he's funding his brother's work, but Martin has yet to produce anything, and because he hasn't, Carl's going to have to cut off his funding, which is why he tried to get him a teaching gig.
You'll never forgive me, will you?
I'll try, little brother.
But Martin has something he needs to see. During a trip to Haiti, that Carl paid for by the way, Martin stumbled upon Haitian voodoo and witnessed people rising from the dead. He also picked up some cheap props from Spirit Halloween. But he does have some corpses hooked up to some equipment that I guess show their brains are still functioning. Carl is kind of done with his brother. He believes his debt has been paid and no longer needs to help him.
You have a nice death.
These two really have it in for one another. At least Carl's joke was just a joke, but Martin straight up kills his brother with the drink they shared earlier. Martin injects his brother with the liquid from a glow stick, which is supposed to remove any trace of the poison he gave him.
How does it feel being dead?
I'm not dead.
Looks like Martin's little theory was right. Carl is dead, but his brain still seems to be functioning, somewhat at least. To prove that Carl is dead, Martin even hooks him up to an EKG machine and it just flatlines, so he's definitely dead. But despite being dead, he can still hear, see, and feel. So he's basically just trapped inside his own body with no way of communicating.
Touch is the first sense to go. Organ donor truck is going to be by real soon, and
I have heard some horror stories from a nurse about organ donors and people maybe being dead, so it's not looking good for Carl. Imagine feeling every cut and slice and not being able to do a damn thing about it. Martin brings Carl to a man who seems to be in the cadaver buying business, but what he does with them is his own matter. It's actually just the medical school where Carl played his little trick all those years ago.
where my life ended and your life began.
I understand that he's pissed, but I'm not sure murder is a fair revenge for what was just supposed to be a little prank. Things are only going to get worse for Carl because he's about to be hung in the meat cooler. For his sake, I sure hope Judd Nelson isn't in there.
Yes, okay, I killed him. Just hold that door open.
There's no Judd Nelson, but Candyman here hooks him and hangs him.
I guess you'll just be hanging around till then.
Hey now, leave the puns to the Crypt Keeper. The hook doesn't hold for long, and Carl falls flat on his face. Hey, at least he lost all sense of feeling. Martin's Jamaican friend comes in a few hours later to fetch Carl's corpse, and they make sure you know he's Jamaican by playing some stereotypical music and having him smoke weed.
You want to try me just ganja? Yeah, man. But tell you to take it to another plane.
Mitch doesn't realize Carl is actually straight edge. But is a corpse supposed to blink? Mitch brings Carl to a table because it's time to prepare his body, and by prepare it, I mean it's time for the embalming process. Martin can't miss out on all the fun, and neither can his class, because he's about to remove Carl's brain. You know what? I don't think corpses are supposed to move their fingers either. No matter, Martin still cuts his own brother's head open as if it were a can with a can opener.
Welcome back to the world of the living, little brother.
Oh, the whole thing was a prank. Well, kind of a prank. Martin still did drug his brother with something that did give him a heart attack, but thank God for the reagent he snuck from Herbert West. This green goo somehow preserves brain function during a traumatic event, which I guess would give doctors more time to save the person, but why take the chance on your own brother? It doesn't matter because everyone is all smiles now. Martin's research appears to have been a great success, and guess that means we have a happy ending to a Tales from the Crypt episode.
He's having another heart attack.
Oh, I guess not. Carl has yet another heart attack, but I guess Martin's little concoction can only work one time? Well, it was actually Martin's drug that killed him. It caused the second heart attack, which I guess makes Martin a murderer. But hey, at least Carl can't feel what's about to happen.
The sense of touch, it isn't the first thing to go, it's the last.
Abra Cadaver is based off the story Dead Right, which can be found in the pages of Tales from the Crypt number 37, written by Al Feldstein with art by Jack Davis. The cover features a monstrous and decomposing corpse rising from its grave, and the poor guy who seems to be completely unaware. The story follows two old men, Carl and Joseph. Both had become rather respected in the medical field, but were both unmarried and spent most Friday nights just hanging out and sipping on some brandy. The men were well off, but since they had no one to leave their immense wealth to, they decided to arrange it so they were each other's inheritors. The men were good friends, but often had disagreements, especially whenever Joseph brought up his theory that when someone dies, the brain still lives on for some time after. He claims the body goes into a state of shock, reducing the metabolism of the brain and allowing it to continue to see, hear, and feel for hours or maybe even days after the person has died. Every time the men are together, Joseph brings this up, and every time Carl attempts to leave in anger. That is, until Joseph brings out the brandy. But this night, things went a little differently than usual. Joseph didn't mention his theory at all. Instead, he told Carl that he was flat broke. He's in a great deal of debt and needs Carl's help. Carl tells Joseph he'll lend him any amount he needs, but Joseph isn't asking for anything. He's simply going to take it. Joseph poisoned Carl's brandy, and since he's the only one on Carl's will, he'll get it all. Carl chokes and coughs as the fast-acting poison begins to shut his body down. Carl's body lay limp on the floor, and even though he appears to be dead, Joseph may have been right because Carl can still see, hear, and feel everything. Joseph calls Ben from the Norton funeral parlor and tells him to get down here ASAP as Carl has suddenly died. Carl watched on as Joseph told him he's been trying to kill him for some time with his crazy theory, hoping he would get so angry that he'd have a heart attack. But it wasn't so easy, so he had to poison him. And since Joseph is a doctor, he can sign the death certificate as natural causes, and no one will ever question it. When Ben arrives, Joseph feigns being bereaved and explains to the man what happened. Since Carl had no family, Joseph offers to tag along with Ben as they load him up for the funeral parlor. But Carl can see and hear everything. He feels when the men pick him up and stares into their souls as they carry him off. When they arrive at the funeral parlor, they place Carl on the cold marble table. The sound of hoses, clinking bottles, and a pump motor is all Carl can hear as the men begin to drain his blood and begin the embalming process. After the embalming, Joseph picks out a casket. Not a very expensive casket, mind you. He is deep in debt after all. Carl's eyes are closed shut. He's placed inside the coffin and all he can hear is the nails as the coffin lid is fastened shut. Next, Carl can hear the sounds of his own eulogy being read at his funeral. Then the coolness of the air as his coffin begins to be lowered down into the grave. Dirt begins to be shoveled onto the coffin, but the gag is up. Joseph and Ben open the coffin to tell Carl that he's actually just paralyzed and should wake up now. The whole thing was a prank. They never went anywhere but to Joseph's backyard. They played sound effects and drove around to make it seem as though Carl had died. But to Joseph and Ben's horror, Carl isn't waking up. He should have waken up by now, but what Joseph doesn't know is Carl suffered a heart attack just before Ben arrived, and his theory that the brain lives on long after death is true. He just won't find out about it until it's his turn for the grave. Abra Cadaver is a pretty creepy episode of Tales from the Crypt. The idea that when you die you can still see and feel things around you for a bit is a terrifying idea. Imagine being trapped inside your own body and witnessing what happens after death, but not being able to say or do anything about it. Like I've mentioned, I've heard horror stories about organ donors that might not actually have been dead when having their organs removed, and it's pretty disturbing. There's a bit of playfulness in this one, but for the most part it's played pretty straight. The scene where they fake embalm him has always grossed me out. I don't know why, but embalming scenes in particular, or anytime someone has their blood drained, it just grosses me out. Beau Bridges and Tony Goldwyn both do a good job as brothers Martin and Carl, though Tony mostly just has to lay still. I'm wondering if the scene where his eyes blink was intentional, because only moments later his fingers begin to move as he starts to wake, so maybe they were trying to show the audience that he was still alive, but I think it's funnier if it's just a little mistake. The episode was written by Jim Burge, who outside of this has written nothing else and only appeared in 2 movies as an extra. How someone with no credits got to write an episode of Tales from the Crypt is a mystery to me. At least the episode's director Stephen Hopkins has something to his name besides this show. He's actually directed 3 episodes of the show and films like Predator 2 and The Ghost in the Darkness. Abra Cadaver is a pretty good episode with a fairly disturbing premise. I definitely recommend you checking this one out. But what do you think of Abra Cadaver? Let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you're having a great day and stay spooky.
Wanna play doctor? Then open wide and say,